My sister borrowed our grandmother's ring 2 months before Thanksgiving. She called it borrowing. She wore it to her anniversary party, smiled for 300 photographs, posted them everywhere, and then simply never brought it back. I didn't make a scene. I didn't send a demanding text. I didn't corner her in the driveway and hold out my hand. I just waited. And I want you to know, some people in my family still think what happened at that Thanksgiving table was calculated and cold. After everything I'm about to tell you, I genuinely want to know what you think. The ring belonged to my grandmother, Dolores. Not to my mother, not to my sister Renata, and not to me in the way you inherit a piece of jewelry and put it in a drawer. It was a platinum and ruby estate ring appraised at $240,000, and my grandmother had placed it in a formal trust document handled by her estate attorney, with specific instructions that it passed to me upon her death. She passed 18 months before this Thanksgiving. The ring had been sitting in a bank vault under my name for 14 of those months, until my sister asked to wear it once. Once. I told myself it would be fine. Renata had borrowed things before and returned them. She was careless, not criminal. She was self-centered the way a lot of middle children become self-centered when a family spends 20 years telling them they're the pretty one and expecting nothing more from them. I had compassion for that, even when it exhausted me, so I said yes. And 2 months later, I was sitting at my mother's dining room table watching my 8-year-old daughter Lily fold her napkin in her lap, and the ring was still sitting somewhere I couldn't see it. Let me tell you how we got here. My name is Nora Scott. My sister Renata Delgado, she took her husband's name when she married 11 years ago, is my only sibling, 2 years older than me. Our mother, Beverly Scott, is a retired schoolteacher who has lived in the same house in Macon, Georgia for 31 years. My father passed when I was 19. It has been the three of us since then, plus whoever each of us married or brought home, and in Renata's case that was her husband, Carlos Delgado, who works in commercial insurance and has a laugh that fills whatever room he's in. Carlos is genuinely kind. That matters to this story. Renata and I have never been close in the way some sisters describe, the kind where you call each other every day and finish each other's sentences. We were close in a different way, the way you're close to someone you grew up alongside, someone who knows your history without ever having to be told. We knew each other's wounds. We also knew exactly where to press them. Growing up, the division was simple and unspoken. Renata was beautiful and social and everyone's favorite at a party. I was the one who got good grades and read too much and was told, in 100 small ways, that being capable was less interesting than being charming. My mother didn't intend harm by any of it. She genuinely believed she was preparing me for a world that would be harder on me than it was on Renata, and in some ways she was right. But the message I absorbed before I was old enough to question it was this: you have to earn everything, and you will probably earn it alone, and don't expect applause. I became an estate attorney. Not because of the ring, not because of my grandmother. I became one because I was 23 years old, sitting in a probate clerk's office, watching a woman lose her mother's house to a creditor dispute that a single properly drafted document could have prevented, and I thought, I know how to prevent this. So I went to law school at night while I worked days at a title company. I passed the Georgia bar the first time. I opened my own practice, Nora Scott Estate Law, 7 years ago, initially out of a converted office space on Mulberry Street in Macon with 2 clients and a paralegal named Desiree who is still with me today. By the time Thanksgiving came around, my practice had grown into something I was genuinely proud of. I had 4 attorneys on staff. I managed estate plans for a number of clients across 3 counties, including several with portfolios that would make the average person's understanding of money feel very small. One of my clients, I obviously won't name him, controlled a real estate portfolio valued at approximately $4.2 million, and I had structured his succession plan over 18 months of careful documentation. I'm not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you because my family had no idea. To my mother and my sister, I was still the girl who worked too hard and dated too little and drove the same gray sedan for 6 years because I wasn't flashy enough to care about cars. Renata drove a white Range Rover. She posted about it. The first time I understood the full shape of how my family saw me, I was 27. I had just passed the bar and I called my mother to tell her, and she said, "That's wonderful, honey." Now don't forget, the practical path might be to work for someone established first before you go out on your own. I was already working for someone established. I had been for 3 years. I wrote down what she said in a journal I kept then, not out of bitterness, but because I was beginning to understand that nobody in my immediate family was tracking my progress with any real attention. They had a version of me in their heads, capable, steady, a little boring, and new information didn't update it. It just got filed somewhere and forgotten. The second time was at a birthday dinner for my mother, 4 years before the Thanksgiving I'm describing. Renata had just bought the Range Rover and was talking about possibly renovating their kitchen, granite countertops, the real stuff, not the laminate, and Carlos mentioned that they were thinking about redoing their investment strategy. My mother turned to me and said, "Nora, do you know anyone good at that? One of your law clients, maybe?" She meant a financial advisor. She was asking me to make a referral, as if my only value in a financial conversation was knowing someone useful. I looked at her across the table and thought about the fact that I had, 2 weeks earlier, reviewed the trust documents for a client whose liquid assets alone exceeded $300,000, and that my practice that year had billed over $420,000 total. I smiled. "I'll ask around," I said. That night, I called my financial advisor, Daniel Osai at Meridian Wealth in Atlanta, and we moved another $25,000 into Lily's 529 college account, which by that point had been quietly growing for 3 years. Lily was 5 then. She had no idea. The account was in my name as trustee and hers as beneficiary, and by the Thanksgiving I'm describing, it had grown to just over $68,000. I want you to remember that number. The third incident happened 8 months before Thanksgiving. Renata called me out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning, which was unusual. We usually spoke on weekends, in short bursts, over logistics. She wanted to talk about our mother's health. Beverly had been having some knee trouble, nothing serious, but Renata was convinced it was the start of a longer decline and wanted to discuss whether our mother needed to move to a smaller house. I listened. Then Renata said, "I just think we need to be realistic about who can actually step up here, financially." I asked her what she meant. "I mean," she said carefully, "that Carlos and I are probably in a better position to handle the carrying costs if it came to that." I did not tell her that I had, 3 years earlier, already established a formal financial plan with my mother's accountant, a woman named Gloria Fitch, that included a dedicated reserve account for exactly this kind of eventual need. I did not tell her that I had been quietly funding that reserve at $500 a month since my practice reached its first profitable year. I just said, "I appreciate that you're thinking about it." And when I hung up the phone, I sat in my office for a full minute before I turned back to my desk, and what I felt wasn't anger exactly. It was something more like clarity. My family had a story about me. They had decided, somewhere along the way, that I was the responsible one, and therefore the one least in need of consideration. Responsible people take care of themselves. Responsible people don't need the ring, or the praise, or the inheritance conversation, because responsible people have already figured it out. They had no idea what I had figured out. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, you know exactly what that kind of silence costs. You know the way it hollows out something small in you every time, and you also know the moment you decide to stop letting it. I had a meeting with my own estate attorney, Vera Embicki, who operates out of a firm on Peachtree Street in Atlanta, and who I had known professionally for 6 years before I became her client, on the 14th of March, 2023. That was approximately 9 months before the Thanksgiving in question. I want to be precise about the timing because it matters. I did not call Vera in response to anything Renata had done yet. I called her because I was updating my own documents. I had a daughter. I had a practice. I had assets that needed proper structure, and I had delayed that work the way professionals sometimes delay the thing they're most qualified to do for themselves, because there's always someone else's estate to attend to first. What Vera and I discussed in that first meeting, I will not detail fully here. But I will tell you that by the time I walked out of her office 2.5 hours later, I had begun the process of placing several of my significant assets into a clearly documented structure, with Lily named as beneficiary through a trustee arrangement that I controlled. I had also, for the first time, had a frank conversation about the ring. The ring, my grandmother Doller's ring, was mine by the terms of the trust document my grandmother had signed. I had the document. I had the appraisal. I had a letter from the bank confirming the item in the vault under my name. There was no legal ambiguity. The ring was mine the same way my car was mine, the same way my office furniture was mine. What I did not have yet was any idea that I would need to take formal steps to protect it. That came 2 months later. Renata called me in May. Their anniversary was coming up, their 11th, and she was planning a dinner party at their house. 40-something people, real flowers on the tables, the kind of party that required a photographer and a signature cocktail. She was very excited. And then, near the end of the call, she said, "I have a favor to ask, and you can absolutely say no." I had heard that sentence from Renata before. When someone prefaces a request with "you can absolutely say no," they have already decided you won't. She wanted to borrow the ring. "Just for the party," she said, "just so I can wear it for the photos. I'll put it right back in the vault the next day. I promise, Nora, it would mean everything to me. It was Grandma's, and it feels wrong that it's just sitting in a box." I held the phone and looked at the wall of my office. Desiree had stepped out. It was very quiet. "It's not just sitting in a box," I said. "It's in a vault, that's where it belongs." I know. I'm not trying to, I just thought one night. For the photos, you know how much I loved her." I did know. Renata had loved our grandmother. That was real, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. I also knew that the ring was mine, that I had every legal right to say no, and that saying no would become a 3-week family conversation about how I was rigid and possessive and couldn't let anyone have anything. My mother would call. Carlos would text something well-intentioned but ultimately unhelpful. The energy cost of refusing in my family was always higher than the energy cost of agreeing. I said yes. I told her I wanted it back within 48 hours of the party. Renata agreed immediately, warmly, with the kind of gratitude that felt disproportionate to the ask. That should have been my first signal. The party was on a Saturday in May. By the following Wednesday, I had not heard from her. I sent a text, "How was the party? Ring back in the vault?" She replied with 3 exclamation points and a photograph from the party and nothing else. By the following Monday, it had been 9 days. I called her. She said she'd been swamped, she'd drop it off to me this week for sure. I said fine. That week came and went. The week after that came and went. By the end of June, 6 weeks after the party, I had asked 4 times. The responses were always warm and always vague. "I haven't forgotten. This week, I promise. I've just been so busy, you know how it is." Each time I asked, she matched my request with an emotional temperature that made escalating feel disproportionate. She wasn't hostile. She wasn't defensive. She was breezy, and that breeziness was its own kind of wall. I called Vera Mbeki on the 3rd of July. I told her the situation. Vera was quiet for a moment, the way she gets quiet when she's decided something. Then she said, "We should formally document the demand in writing. I'll draft a letter." I told her to hold off. Not because I was being passive, but because I was being strategic. Vera's letter would work. It would work immediately. Renata would return the ring the day she received it, humiliated and furious, and Christmas that year would be catastrophic, and my mother would spend 6 months in the middle trying to smooth something that couldn't be smoothed. I wasn't ready to go to war in July. I was thinking about Thanksgiving. I had a reason for that timing, and it had everything to do with what I had found out in late June, 2 weeks before I called Vera. My mother had mentioned, during one of our Sunday calls, that Renata and Carlos were having some money stress. She mentioned it the way she always mentioned things she wasn't supposed to repeat, lightly, parenthetically, hoping I would absorb it without asking follow-up questions. I asked follow-up questions. My mother, who was never a skilled liar, told me that Carlos's company had gone through a restructuring and that some of his compensation had shifted to commission-based, and that Renata had mentioned the household budget was tighter than usual. I turned that over in my mind for several days. And then I understood something that I hadn't let myself consider before. Renata hadn't kept the ring by accident. She had kept it because in a moment of financial pressure, a $240,000 ring, she already had physical possession of must have looked like something other than something she was borrowing. I don't know exactly what she was planning. I don't know if she had made any calls, or had any specific intention, or if it was just something she held onto because letting go of it felt like losing an option. But I know what the ring was worth. And I know what financial stress does to people's relationships with their options. I called Daniel Osai at Meridian and asked him to confirm the current value of Lily's college fund. $68,400. Growing. Safe. Not something Renata knew about, not something anyone in my family had any connection to. Then I made a second call, this one to my office. I asked Desiree to pull the appraisal documentation for the ring and the trust transfer letter from my grandmother's estate. She scanned them and sent them to my personal email. I forwarded them to Vera with a note. Hold these, we may need them soon. And then I waited for Thanksgiving. The decision to wait was not passive. I want to be very clear about that, because I know how it can sound. The decision to wait was the decision of someone who knew exactly what she had, knew exactly what the moment needed to be, and understood that arriving at the right moment with the right evidence was worth more than arriving at the wrong moment with nothing but righteous anger. I had a document trail, I had an appraisal, I had a vault receipt, I had an estate attorney. What I did not have yet was a room full of witnesses. Thanksgiving was going to give me that. I spent the weeks leading up to it doing something that probably seems strange. I went to every family event I was invited to without mentioning the ring once. I went to my mother's house for her birthday in October. I went to Lily's school play in early November and sat 2 rows behind Renata and Carlos and waved when they turned around. I watched my sister wear a different piece of jewelry every time I saw her, something I had never noticed before and noticed it now because I was looking. The ruby ring never appeared. She was keeping it out of sight. That told me something. On the 1st of November, I had a second meeting with Vera. We talked through scenarios. Vera is not the kind of attorney who panics or rushes. She has a way of laying out facts side by side on the table. Literally, she puts documents in physical rows, and she goes through each one in a voice like she's describing the weather. You have the trust instrument, she said. You have the appraisal at $240,000. You have the bank documentation showing transfer to your name. You have written text messages in which your sister acknowledged possession of the item and promised to return it. That is a civil claim, minimum. Depending on intent, it could go further. She aligned the last document with the others and looked up. What do you want the outcome to be? I thought about that for longer than Vera expected me to. I want my family to understand what she did, I said. Not just me, all of them. Vera nodded slowly. Then the venue matters as much as the documentation. I left her office that afternoon and sat in my car for 10 minutes before I started the engine. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the way Dollars used to hold that ring up to window light and say, "This is not jewelry, Nora. This is the record of something." She meant her own marriage, her own history, the decades in that ring the way decades are in anything you keep long enough. She wanted me to have it because she thought I understood what keeping something meant. I understood it exactly. The last thing I did before Thanksgiving, 3 days before the holiday, was a small thing that felt enormous in the doing of it. I drove to my bank. I sat across from the branch manager, a quietly competent woman named Helen Park who had handled my accounts for 4 years, and I asked her to confirm for me in writing that the vault item registered under my name, the ring, had not been accessed, transferred, or removed from the vault by anyone. She reviewed the records. She confirmed it. She provided a simple 1-page letter on bank letterhead. I put that letter in a folder with the appraisal, the trust instrument, and the text message transcript that Desiree had helped me format. Then I folded a note. One note, handwritten, specific. I placed it inside a small envelope and tucked it into my own napkin, which I would be setting at the table myself. I had offered to help my mother set up the night before, and she had been grateful because Renata was always too busy to help set tables. Inside Lily's napkin, I placed a different note. A simpler one. My daughter did not know what the note said when she sat down at that table. She knew that her mother had told her that morning that if she found a note in her napkin at dinner, she should read it out loud. I told her it was a Thanksgiving game. She was 8 years old. She did exactly what I asked. Everything I had built, everything I had documented, every month of patience, and every conversation I had not had, and every moment I had let slide rather than burn a bridge too early, all of it was about to come to the table at once. And what was extraordinary, what I still think about when I need to remember why strategic patience is not the same thing as weakness, is that I didn't say a single word. My daughter did it for me, but the ring was only part of what was waiting in that vault. And my sister, sitting across from me with her husband's hand on her knee and her fork raised toward her mouth, had absolutely no idea what the other part was. Thanksgiving that year fell on the 21st of November. My mother's house seats 14 at the dining room table with the leaf inserted, and Beverly had inserted the leaf, set out the good dishes, and asked everyone to arrive by 2 in the afternoon. There were 11 of us that day. My mother at the head, Renata and Carlos to her left, Carlos's mother Marisol, a quiet woman in her 70s who observed everything and commented on nothing, next to Carlos, then two of Carlos's cousins whose names I always confused, then my mother's neighbor Dottie who had eaten Thanksgiving with us for 9 years since her husband passed, then my mother's younger brother, my uncle Raymond, his wife Cheryl, then me, and then Lily beside me. 11 people. I knew where every one of them would be sitting, because I had helped set the table the night before. The morning of, Lily woke up asking if she could wear her dress with the flowers on it, and I said yes, and we drove the 40 minutes to my mother's house with the radio on, and Lily asking me approximately 400 questions about turkeys. Whether they could swim, whether they had best friends, whether a turkey had ever been president. I answered everyone. I was calm in a way that surprised even me, the kind of calm that isn't distance but is instead the feeling of arriving somewhere you've been moving toward for a long time. We got there at 1:45. Renata's Range Rover was already in the driveway. I parked behind it, took the pie I'd brought from the back seat, and held Lily's hand up the front walk. My mother met us at the door, already in her apron, already flushed from the kitchen. She hugged Lily first, then me, then spotted the pie. "Oh, you brought the brown sugar one." She took it from me, pleased. "Renata brought wine, too much wine. Tell her she brings too much wine." "I never tell Renata anything," I said, and my mother laughed because she thought I was joking. Inside, the house smelled like it always smelled on Thanksgiving, the specific combination of my mother's cornbread dressing and the candles she bought at the drugstore that she thought were fancy. Carlos was in the living room with Raymond, watching the pregame with the volume low out of courtesy. He stood up when he saw me, gave me a real hug, and then bent down and held his hand out to Lily. "There she is. You get taller every time I see you." Lily took his hand very seriously. "I grew 1 inch since August. 1 inch, that's huge." He was genuinely warm about it. Carlos was always genuinely warm. I had thought about him a lot in the months leading up to this day, about what knowing would cost him, about whether what I was about to do was fair to a man who had not asked his wife to do what she'd done. I had not found a clean answer. I had decided that fair had stopped being the right question about 4 months earlier. Renata came out of the kitchen holding a glass of wine. She was wearing a green dress, her dark hair down, and she looked the way she always looked at my mother's house, like the event had been organized around her. She smiled when she saw me, not a tense smile, a real one. That was Renata's specific gift. She could be warm and present even when she was holding something of yours that she had no intention of returning. "You made it," she kissed my cheek. "I love that sweater." "Thanks." I let her hug me. Over her shoulder, I saw Lily had already migrated toward the kitchen with my mother. The table was visible from where we stood, everything set, napkins folded in the center of each plate. I had folded them myself the night before. I knew exactly which one was Lily's. We moved through the next hour the way families move through the hour before a big meal, everyone circling the kitchen, everyone offering to help and being told no, everyone catching up in the loose, overlapping way of people who see each other in clusters. Dottie told me she had started taking a painting class. Raymond's wife, Cheryl, asked about my practice in the polite way that signaled she wasn't actually interested in the answer, just being kind. Marisol sat near the window with a cup of tea and watched the backyard with the placid attention of someone who has long since stopped needing conversation to feel comfortable. Renata refilled her glass once before we sat down, then again just after we sat. My mother brought out the turkey at 3:10. Everyone applauded, which is a thing my family does and which I have always found both embarrassing and completely charming. Raymond said grace. It was long. Carlos's cousin Miguel whispered something to his brother that made the brother suppress a laugh. Lily folded her hands very properly and kept her eyes closed the entire time because she took grace seriously at 8 in a way that I suspected she would not at 18. Then Raymond said amen, and the dishes started moving around the table, and for about 12 minutes everything was exactly the noise and warmth of a family holiday. Marisol took small portions of everything and thanked Beverly 3 times. Dottie asked Lily what she was learning in school. Lily said, "Fractions. They're actually not that bad once you understand that fractions are just dividing." Dottie said she had never thought of it that way. Renata was talking to Carlos in a low voice about something. I didn't try to hear it. I was watching Lily, who was unfolding her napkin to lay it across her lap the way I had taught her, corners even, fold toward her. She looked down at it. She looked up at me with a question on her face, the pure, uncomplicated curiosity of a child who has found something unexpected. I gave her a small nod. Lily looked back down at the note. She had learned to read at 5 and had been voracious about it since. She reviewed the note for about 4 seconds. Then, in her clear, carrying 8-year-old voice, she looked across the table toward her Uncle Carlos and said, "Did Grandma ever get her ring back?" The table changed temperature. It didn't happen in a dramatic movie way. It happened the way things happen at family dinners when something lands that everyone was trying to avoid, a gradual, thickening freeze. Dottie's fork paused between her plate and her mouth. Raymond looked up from his cornbread. My mother's hand stopped moving on her napkin. Carlos blinked. He looked at Lily. He looked at Renata. Renata's face did something I had not seen it do before. It didn't drain of color or go stiff. It collapsed, just slightly, like a building that has had a single structural support removed. Her chin came down a fraction of an inch. Her hand, which had been lifting her wine glass, set it back on the table with careful precision. Lily, who did not understand what had just happened, added helpfully, "The note says to check the bank vault." Nobody spoke. 4 full seconds in which the only sound was the heat vent near the floor and someone outside on the street with a leaf blower that had no idea what it was interrupting. My mother turned to me. "Nora." Not a question, not an accusation. Just my name with the weight of 30-some years of knowing me behind it. I set my fork down. "Hi, everyone, I'm glad we're all together." My voice came out even. I had not rehearsed it. I had decided that rehearsing would make it sound like a speech, and this was not a speech. This was a conversation I was simply going to finish. Renata borrowed Grandma Doller's ring in May. She was going to return it within 48 hours. It has now been 6 months. The silence that followed that was a different kind, not frozen, but dense. Carlos turned to Renata. His face had gone very still in the way that people who are usually expressive go still when they are working very hard to process something. "Renata," his voice was low. "Tell me that's not true." Renata opened her mouth, closed it. Her hand went to the stem of her wine glass, not lifting it, just wrapping around it like she needed something to hold. "It's not, I was going to return it. There were things happening and I kept meaning to, and 6 months. Carlos's voice didn't rise. It went in the other direction, quieter and more precise. "She asked you 4 times. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at his wife. I heard you on the phone, I thought it was something small." Renata's eyes came to mine fast. "We could have talked about this privately." "I tried that." I folded my hands on the table. 4 times. My mother pressed both palms flat on the tablecloth. "The ring is still in her vault though, right? It's safe?" "Nobody. The ring is in her vault," I said. "I confirmed that with the bank 3 days ago in writing. Renata has physical possession of a key that she was given temporarily and didn't return. The ring itself is still in a controlled location. That part, at least, is intact." I let that land. "That's not why I'm raising this at dinner." Renata's chin came up. There it was, the defensive angle, the tone that had ended approximately 100 arguments in our childhood by making me feel like the aggressor for having a grievance. "Then why are you raising it at dinner, Nora?" "In front of," she gestured with one hand, taking in Lily, Marisol, Dottie, all of them. I reached beside my chair. I had placed a folder there when I helped set up the night before, standing it against the baseboard where it was invisible unless you were looking. I put it on the table. Renata's eyes dropped to it. "'Cause," I said, "the ring is the part you understand. It's the other part I need everyone to hear." Raymond, who had been entirely silent, leaned forward on his elbows. He is a man who, at 61, has seen enough in a long life to know when a conversation has moved past the point of being managed. He looked at me with an expression I recognized from childhood, the one he used when he was deciding whether to intervene. Whatever he found in my face told him to wait. I opened the folder. "If you're still with me, stay, because what I did next is the reason I am telling you this story." The first document I placed flat on the table in front of me was the trust instrument. My grandmother's estate document, notarized, dated, with my name on it in the places that mattered, and the ring described in the attached exhibit with its appraisal at $240,000. I didn't need to say anything. My mother and my uncle knew that document existed. They had been in the attorney's office when it was signed. They had known the ring went to me. They had simply, in the way families do, allowed that fact to soften over time until it became a vague sentiment rather than a legal reality. My mother recognized it. She recognized it the way you recognize something you've been trying not to think about. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. Renata's chin was still up. "I know what that is. I know the ring is yours." I told you I was going to return it. You told me that 4 separate times over 6 months. I laid the second document beside the first, the bank letter, 1 page, Helen Park's signature at the bottom, confirming that the vault item had not been transferred or accessed and remained under my name. This is from my bank, dated last Tuesday. Carlos picked it up. He reviewed it. He put it down. He ran a hand over the back of his neck and then just left his hand there. And this. The third document was the text message transcript, 41 messages, organized chronologically from the Monday after the anniversary party through mid-October, with Renata's promises highlighted in yellow. My paralegal Desiree had formatted it. It was very clear. This is our conversation over 6 months. You can see the dates. Renata's hand left the wine glass. She flattened both palms on the tablecloth in front of her, and I saw the tendons in her wrists go tight. Nora. Her voice had dropped to something I could only describe as controlled. She was working very hard to keep it controlled. You're doing this in front of Mama, in front of Carlos's mother, in front of Lily? Lily asked an innocent question. I didn't plan for her to be the one who opened it. That was true. I had planned for the note in Lily's napkin to prompt the question, but I had not planned what question she would ask or how she would phrase it. Children don't follow scripts. But since the question is on the table, I'm going to answer it fully. Marisol, from her seat near the window, had turned entirely in her chair to face the center of the table. She hadn't spoken. She had the particular stillness of a woman who has survived much worse than a bad Thanksgiving and is waiting patiently to see how this one ends. Dottie had set down her fork completely and was watching with wide, round eyes that she kept trying to cast toward the window, but they kept finding their way back. I want to understand, my mother said, and her voice was careful in the way it was always careful when she was about to say something she'd been carrying. Are you saying Renata, are you saying this was intentional? You weren't planning to give it back? Renata's eyes went to our mother. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw something cross her face that wasn't defensiveness. It was a flicker of the same thing I had seen on the phone in May when she asked to borrow it. Genuine feeling. She had loved our grandmother. That was still true. The trouble was that the things that were true about Renata often coexisted with things that were also true about what she had done, and she had not yet found a way to hold both. I was going to give it back, she said, and I believed the first part of it. I believed she had believed that. It felt like it should have gone to both of us. Grandma loved both of us. And you always got everything. You got the ring. You got the money she left you. You've built this whole, she stopped, her jaw moved. You've been fine, you've always been fine. I thought 1 more month, I'll find the right time, I'll bring it back. I wasn't going to sell it or anything. I know. My voice stayed flat. I know you weren't going to sell it. That's why the ring is still in the vault. But that's also not the whole reason I'm here. The folder had 1 more item in it. I had not planned to use it at Thanksgiving. I had planned to use it in January, in Vera Embeke's office, in a formal conversation about the estate documents. But Renata had said something in the last 30 seconds that changed the calculation. She had said you always got everything. She had said you've built this whole and stopped. She didn't know what I'd built. None of them did. And that particular kind of invisibility, the kind where you are simultaneously resented for your advantages and completely unseen in your actual life, had been the texture of my family relationships for long enough. I took out the last document. It was a single-page summary that Vera had prepared at my request 2 weeks prior. A plain language overview of my estate structure, not detailing specific client work, but outlining the nature of my practice, the trust structure I had established for Lily, and the number that I had almost not included and then decided to include because it was relevant to the claim that I had always gotten everything and never had it harder than anyone else. The current assessed value of the assets I had built over 7 years of my practice, placed in trust for my daughter, $418,000 in documented assets, plus the $68,400 in Lily's college fund. I placed it in the center of the table. Renata looked at it. She didn't reach for it. She looked at it the way you look at something that has appeared where you were certain there was nothing. Carlos reached across and picked it up. His eyes moved across the page. When he put it down, his face had an expression I am still not sure I can describe accurately. It was something between the end of one understanding of a situation and the beginning of another, and those two things arriving at the same moment looked like a kind of grief. 400 and, he stopped himself, looked at me. This is your practice. 7 years, I said. Lily's college fund has been growing since she was 3, everything in trust, properly structured. I looked at Renata. I have never needed anything from this family except what was mine by right. The ring was mine by right. I am asking for the key back. Tonight. Renata's composure broke the rest of the way. Not in a loud way, Renata has never done anything loudly, it's not her register. It happened quietly, from the inside out. The careful angle of her chin dropped. Her eyes filled without spilling over for a few seconds, and she pressed 2 fingers against her mouth. And what I saw in her face in that moment was not guilt exactly, though guilt was part of it. What I saw was the particular collapse of someone whose understanding of the hierarchy they've been living in has just been fundamentally revised, and who does not yet know what that means for them. I didn't know, she said, behind her fingers. It was almost inaudible. I know you didn't. I meant it. That's not your fault. I kept it private because it was mine. But you've been deciding what I have and what I deserve based on a story about me that was never accurate, and I've let that stand for a long time. My mother had both hands over her mouth. Uncle Raymond had leaned back in his chair and was looking at the ceiling. Dottie had given up entirely on looking anywhere except directly at our family. Cheryl had a hand on Raymond's arm and was very still. Carlos set the document down precisely in front of him. Renata. His voice was different now, not the controlled quiet from before, but something careful and sad. Give her the key. Renata looked at her husband. Her hand went to her necklace, an instinctive reach that I recognized. She always touched her jewelry when she was cornered, had done it since we were teenagers. Her fingers found the chain and held it. I don't have it with me. Where is it? I asked. A pause, 3 seconds for, at home, in the kitchen drawer. Carlos pushed his chair back from the table. The scrape of it against the hardwood floor was the loudest thing in the room. We'll go get it now. Renata looked up at him. Carlos, we'll go get it now, he repeated, and there was a finality in it that was not unkind but was not open for discussion either. My mother lowered her hands from her face. When she spoke, her voice was not angry. It was tired in a specific way, the tiredness of someone who has seen the shape of something coming for a while and now has to deal with having arrived at it. How long have you known it wasn't coming back, Nora? I didn't know for certain. I suspected in July. I chose to wait for a moment when the whole family could be part of the conversation. I paused, because I was tired of private conversations being the only kind we had. My mother absorbed that. She looked at the documents on the table. She looked at Lily, who had been watching the adults with the comprehensive attention of a child who understands that something important is happening even without understanding its exact nature. Lily had her napkin folded neatly on her lap and was holding the little note that had started all of this, turning it over in her hands. Mama, I said, using the name I hadn't used for her in years, I'm not angry. I'm just done being quiet about things I have every right to say. My mother nodded once, slowly. I know, she said. I know, sweetheart. That was the moment the room breathed again. Renata and Carlos left before dessert. They drove the 20 minutes to their house, retrieved the key from the kitchen drawer, and came back. I know it was the kitchen drawer because when Carlos handed me the key at the front door, Renata staying back in the entryway, not looking at me directly, he said, it was right where she said, back of the drawer. He held my eyes for a moment and then said, very quietly, I'm sorry, Nora, I should have noticed sooner. I told him it wasn't on him. I meant it. Carlos was not the person who had borrowed the ring or kept it past the date she promised. I held the key in my hand. It was small and entirely ordinary looking, a standard deposit key on a plain silver ring. Nothing about it told the story of what it had cost both of us. I put it in my coat pocket and stood in my mother's front hallway and felt the exact weight of 6 months of patience landing in the form of one small object. Lily was asleep in the back seat by the time we left, her head against the window, the flowered dress wrinkled from a long afternoon. I drove with the radio off. When I got home, I put the key on my kitchen counter where I could see it, and I sat at my table with a cup of tea for about 20 minutes and did not do anything in particular, and that was exactly the right amount of nothing. The following morning, at 9:15, I called Vera Embicki and told her we could stand down from the formal demand letter. She asked if the key had been returned. I told her yes. She asked if I wanted to proceed with anything additional. I thought about it for a moment. Draft a simple letter acknowledging the return and closing the matter, both parties to sign. I don't want any ambiguity later about where we stand. Vera said she'd have it by end of week. 2 days after Thanksgiving, I went to the bank. Helen Park met me at the vault herself. She had an awareness of the situation from the letter she'd provided, and I think she was curious about the ending. I placed the key in the lock. The drawer opened. The ring was there in its case. exactly as it had been. I held it under the light for a moment the way my grandmother used to hold it, and then I put it back and closed the drawer. I had made an appointment with a local jeweler to have the ring formally reinstated in my personal insurance policy with updated appraisal documentation. That was not sentiment. That was just making sure the record reflected reality. Renata signed Vera's letter on the 9th of December. She signed it without pushback, which told me that she had known, on some level, the whole time, exactly what the facts were. Carlos called me a week after Thanksgiving, separately from anything Renata had done, and we talked for almost an hour, the longest conversation I had ever had with my brother-in-law. He told me that they had started talking with a financial counselor, that the previous year had been harder than they had let on to anyone, that he was sorry I had been carrying the knowledge of what she'd done alone for 6 months. I told him I was glad Lily had asked the question. He laughed, a short, real laugh, and said, "She's something, your daughter. She is absolutely something." My mother and I had a longer conversation in early December, just the two of us on the phone on a Sunday evening. She told me she had not known, not really, how much I had built, the practice, the structure I had put around Lily's future. She said, "I think I've been looking at you through the same eyes I had when you were 22. And I said, "I know, Mama, I've been watching you do it." She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "That's on me." I told her it was partly on me too, for keeping it to myself so long that I had inadvertently confirmed the version of me she'd been working from. We didn't resolve everything in one conversation. 30-something years of family dynamics don't resolve in an hour on a Sunday. But we started. That was more than I had expected. As for Renata, she and Carlos are still together, which I will admit surprised me more than a little. They did the work, both of them. The financial counselor became a couples therapist, and whatever happened in those rooms, I was not part of it and don't need to be. Renata and I are not close. We are not pretending to be. We see each other at family events and speak with the careful, considered warmth of two people who have decided that honesty is worth more than performance, which for us is actually a significant improvement over what we had before. The ring is insured, documented, and in the vault where it belongs. Lily's college fund has kept growing. I took on 2 new estate clients in January, both referred by existing clients, and my practice is in the strongest position it has been in 7 years. I work out of a larger office now, still on Mulberry, with a window that gets real afternoon light, which Desiree pointed out last year and which I had somehow not noticed. I notice it now. Lily asked me once, about 3 months after Thanksgiving, what the note in her napkin had said. I had forgotten she hadn't reviewed it carefully. I told her it said, "Ask about Grandma's ring." She thought about that for a moment with the seriousness she brings to fractions, and then she said, "So it was real." "It wasn't a game." I said yes, it was real. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, and went back to what she was doing. That was enough for her. Children accept the truth of things with a directness that adults spend years trying to reclaim. I don't hate my sister. I stopped asking myself whether I should years before any of this happened. What I have now instead of that question is clarity about what I've built, about who is in my daughter's corner, about what I'm willing to let slide and what I'm not. The ring sits in the vault. The documents are in order. The key is back where it belongs. So, did I handle it right? Or should I have handled it privately, the way my family always has? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think.